Welcome to Focus on Why, the podcast where reflection sparks action. I'm Amy Rowlandson, and together we'll explore compelling stories, profound insights, and transformative experiences from inspiring guests worldwide. Feeling lost or unfulfilled? Searching for clarity, purpose, or meaning in your work and life? This podcast invites you on a journey of self-discovery to align your work with your values, shape your future with intention, and create a purposeful way of life. Have a purpose, have a plan, focus on why. Before we begin, have you read my new book yet? Focus on Why, Create a Purposeful Way of Life is co-authored with my late grandfather, George Fleming Kerr, and weaves in poignant journal entries detailing his experiences and insights of the 5 years he spent in captivity during World War II. Honest and heartfelt, this uplifting guide acts as your companion for life. Available in paperback, ebook, and audiobook. Check the show notes for links to get your copy today. Today on Focus on Why, I'm joined by Linda Stevens. Linda, welcome.
Thank you so much, Amy. It is wonderful to be here.
Well, it's wonderful to have you. What is it that you're focusing on right now?
Absolutely women's health still. But now, or in the last 6-7 years, it's been very much on peri to postmenopausal health. My particular focus is on helping women with their pelvic floor function. Their pelvic floor is the beginning of their deep core system. And I see time and time again how incredible women are leaving their jobs or not taking promotions or keeping themselves small, relationship breakdowns, etc., because of pelvic floor issues that they're experiencing perimenopause. So often, in fact, almost always, once we start to lose our estrogen, we start to have pelvic floor issues, especially if we had any kind of trauma in our birth, if we had births. Whilst we still have plenty of estrogen, they tend to be mitigated. And then once we hit that sort of 45 plus age range, so much ends up coming back and just derails women. And unfortunately, our society and our medical system are such that everything is kept below the belt, and anything below the belt is just not talked about. And there's a huge amount of shame. So, yeah, my why is to get more women with incredible decades of experience, life experience, work experience, staying in the game and being able to influence this crazy patriarchal world of ours, essentially. Big umbrella. Strokes there.
Yeah, so no mean feat. This is a huge topic that you're tackling. And why this?
So I was first of all, an advertising and then a television senior producer. Worked at Sky here in the UK and Foxtel in Australia. I was told at 14, don't bother about going into advertising because it's a man's world. And of course, being the person I am, that was a red flag to a bull. And from that moment onwards, all I was ever going to do was get into advertising. And then once I was in advertising, I realized that television, you had more control over everything. So I ended up being a promo producer in television and being like the in-house ad agency. And that was who I was. So I was Linda Wilmot at the time, senior producer, and I worked on some really big jobs, and it was super exciting. And it was very much my identity. And I was absolutely caught up in that whole, 80s and 90s, early 2000s world of commercial television. And then I got pregnant and I had my first baby, Sophie. My waters broke at 33, just on 34 weeks, whilst I was running around Edit Suites on a Sunday, getting something ready for the Foxtel digital launch. And Sophie came, and it was a very traumatic emergency cesarean. And I mean, I thought I'd wet my pants. I had no idea what was going on. I'd been to one, the equivalent of NCT. And it was a real shock to the system, I've got to say. And I remember the first 6 months of Sophie's life, I had this, and I thought that I would be able to just, feed my baby. She'd be popped in the corner. I'd carry on doing some editing or whatever. And I didn't get that baby. I got the baby who was very premature, was in hospital for the first 4 weeks of her life, who, had, first 3 weeks was being tube fed, etc. And she didn't sleep for more than 1 or 2 hours at a time for the first 6 months of her life. And I was breastfeeding her every day and night, every 2 hours. And it was, you can imagine, my sense of self, who I was, this person who was in control of my life. And that was unbelievably shattered. Through all of this, I kept thinking, 6 months, I need to get back to work. 6 months, I need to get back to work, because what I do, who I am, is this person who is in television. And then I found out at 6 months when I went to my doctor to say, why have I got a mouthful full of ulcers and I'm utterly exhausted and things? I must need a vitamin B injection, or maybe my iron's low, but I need to get back to work. So can you sort me out? And she sent me off with my full pan of bloods. And that night, it was a Friday, that night, my husband and I were heading out to dinner with a whole bunch of his university friends. And the doctor called me at 8 p.m. And she said, Linda, I got your blood results and I thought I'd better call you immediately. So, of course, I thought, I've got cancer. That's why I'm feeling so dreadful. And she said, I think you need to sit down. And she said, you're pregnant. And I think it might be twins. Anyway, I literally couldn't speak. The rug was pulled out from underneath me. And I was pregnant with Patrick. And I hadn't had a period at the stage. I was still breastfeeding day and night, every 2 hours. I actually think it was immaculate conception, because I can't remember doing any baby making. And so that really put paid to my previous life, and also my ego, my sense of who I was, I had been practicing yoga for 10 years prior to my first 2 babies. But I actually don't think I breathed the whole time. I was doing Ashtanga yoga, and I was like gymnastics, so I was very physically strong, but I was not grounded or centered. I was a typical A-type personality. And Patrick has cerebellar ataxia. He was born with very enlarged spleen and liver, and he also was very premature. And up until he was 5, I was still carrying him up and down stairs and stuff. He had a really, really tough beginning. And we were told it was probably degenerative. We were being tested for some really difficult mitochondrial disorders, etc. I went into a really, really black hole. Like, I was not good at this mothering thing, at all. I felt it was because I had caught the CMV virus whilst I was pregnant with Patrick in the first trimester, which I didn't know. If you catch the CMV virus for the first time ever and you don't have any immunity, it can go across the placenta. So all of his issues at the time, I thought, were because of me, basically my fault. So I was in a pretty bad place. And at that point, my mum came over from New Zealand, I'm a Kiwi, to see us in Sydney. She's worried about me. And I think she saw me, just like, you go off to the hairdressers, I'll look after the children. So I was sitting there at the hairdressers, and the hairdresser was chatting away, and I was zoned out. But suddenly, it was like slow-mo. It was like being in a deja vu. I heard her say something about her yoga teacher training, and about this ashram north of Sydney. And I was like, stop, say that again. And she told me about this training. And I had very clear words in my head, some divine intervention, I don't know, that said, this is your rope out of here. And I knew in that moment that I was going to retrain as a yoga teacher, and I knew that this was going to be my rope out of there. And I rang my husband as I left the hairdressers, and I said, I know what I'm going to do. And the year I retrained as a yoga teacher, the first 6 months was all philosophy, yoga philosophy. And it was such a paradigm shift for me. And part of that was my realization that my son Patch's journey was his own journey, that I, as his mother, had been chosen to advocate for him, to love him, to support him, to be there beside him. But he was born into his own body with all of his own issues and challenges for his own soul's evolution. And that's what I believe. And yoga helped me get to that point. Yoga philosophy helped me get to that point. And it was such a huge, I always say, this freedom and surrender. There's such a huge freedom in letting go of that responsibility and instead stepping into, well, what can I do to support him, to never, ever hold him back, and to teach him to live fearlessly. So we, then I became a yoga teacher. I specialised in pre and postnatal because obviously I had a VBAC with Patrick as well, which is a vaginal birth after cesarean. Despite being told my uterus would explode and I'd kill my baby, etc. Having had such a terrifying and traumatic emergency cesarean with Sophie, I really needed to try to have a VBAC. And luckily, I had the senior midwife who was able to say to me, in all of her 30 years of midwifery, she'd never had somebody actually have their uterus explode like the obstetrician said. I had real fair tactics given to me. And I did, and despite many problems, i.e., when you've had a cesarean, you've got catheters in, you're all hooked up, you can't move around very easily, etc. Very young, fearful midwife so anyway, I was using all of my yoga tools, and I birthed Patch naturally. And so after that experience, I wanted to teach other women how to birth in a way and prepare for birth. I feel preparing for birth is so unbelievably important. So I created my yoga birthing methodology, started to create it then. And I was teaching pre and postnatal yoga mainly. And then when I was 40, I got pregnant again. Surprise, but that was the fabulous surprise, because this time I kind of knew what it was going to be okay. But my body has a way of giving me the lessons I need to learn experientially. Like, God doesn't want to send me a book or send me a podcast. I have to, for some reason, I've got to go through this stuff myself. So I actually went into full-blown labor at 24 weeks and rushed into hospital. Another lady was in there also 24 weeks. Her baby was born and died. So the stakes were high. They gave me some, very strong anti-labor drugs, which I remained on. And then I was put under, and my cervix was all stitched up, which normally you don't do that after 18 weeks. So this is pretty late in the game to try and save the pregnancy. And then I spent the next 4 months lying on my left side with my heart down and my pelvis up. And I only got up to go to the loo and have a quick shower once a week, to keep Livy inside. And then at 31 weeks, so I've been lying for 7 weeks, and I am the biggest advocate of, if we don't use it, we lose it, because obviously not moving, all of my pelvic stabilizing muscles atrophied. And these are so important. That's why I'm so incredibly passionate about women keeping the integrity of their pelvic floor and their deep core stabilizing muscles strong, because mine all atrophied. I stood up quickly one day and my whole pubic bone completely split, which I can't ever describe the level of intense knife-like pain. And I had really struggled to stay conscious, and it was horrific. And I ended up being bound. I had a chiropractor come visit me every single evening just to give me adjustments to keep me coping with pain. And And I was told that if I basically, by the stage I was a kind of expert pre and postnatal teacher, so I kind of knew what I needed to do birthing. I was very, very scared about having intervention and somebody taking my legs further than they should go apart, and then not being able to walk afterwards with 3 kids. So I made the decision to not have a cesarean to birth naturally. And it was the hardest thing I will ever do in my life. And I did it. And it was the most, I mean, the birthing pain, I couldn't feel the birthing pain because every time I had a contraction, my pubic bone was pulling apart further. It was pretty intense. But I'm like, if I can live through that, I can live through anything. So honestly, nothing else since then has been much of a problem. So I birthed Liv. Unfortunately, I couldn't walk afterwards. Um, and so, but I was really determined to heal myself without surgery. And that is when I did a real deep dive into biomechanics, because this kind of healing needed a lot more than what I had been teaching to this point. I was really vigilant, and I did basically knit myself together again from the inside out. And I created Yoga Mums on the basis of that healing, and my pelvic core restore methodology started then. And that's what I've been teaching. You know, I've been growing my methodology since then. And then I hit perimenopause, and like many of us, everything comes undone again. All the good work comes undone once we lose that elasticizing estrogen. And I just kept seeing around me all these good women, these amazing mothers, strong women, leaders who were checking out. And I checked out. And I was like, if somebody who's so plugged in like I am to the health professionals and all this shit was really, really struggling to get the answers I needed and the help I needed, it would be almost impossible for most women. So this was when I was 46, 47. I really hit a big brick wall. I'm now 54 this month. And golly, so that's been 8 years. Big, yeah, big 8 years. And perimenopause is an absolute roller coaster. Like I was talking to a friend recently, a pelvic floor physiotherapist that I refer a lot of people to because I think she's the best person in the UK. She's amazing. And we've worked together now for quite a long time. We cross-refer to each other because we understand the female body on a bigger level than most people out there. And she is the same age as me. And we were looking at each other going, because we're both just coming into our postmenopausal year. And we were like, that was insane. And I remember once coming up out of the water after I'd been down one of these horror water slides, you know, one of those tube water slides, and these horrible young kids. When I was at the top of this ladder and there were like 3 black holes, I said, oh my goodness, which is the easiest one? Because I'm terrified of heights as well. And one of the kids goes, oh, that one. Well, it wasn't. It was the dreadful one. And it was a pure horror ride. And every time you thought it couldn't get worse, you got slammed around another corner and slammed. And I finally got spewed out, plunged underneath the water. And when I came up, my bikini had come off completely. And I had to go back under to try and find my costume. But when I finally got out of that water, and I was like, I'm still alive, but whoa. And when I was talking to my friend Alrina, and we looked at each other, and we were like, it reminded me of coming out of that water slide. Like, wow, that was insane. So my passion is to equip women, you know, to help them negotiate those perimenopausal years. So much of what we see with pelvic floor dysfunction issues, like prolapse, which is when the organs are actually dropping down into the vagina and sometimes out, like extreme pain, like various forms of leaking. So much is actually attributable to tension patterns. And for women, we store our tension in the pelvis. So you might feel it around the jaw and around the neck and the shoulders. But for us, we hold all this tension in the pelvic area, which leads to inflammation, congestion, often tripping into, endometriosis, all sorts of conditions which are exacerbated by a pelvic area that is holding tension patterns. And when your muscles atrophy, when they're not being used, they can also hold tension. So tension isn't strength, it's weakness. And so I have found that a huge amount of my work is actually around helping women to learn to regulate their nervous system. So using vagus nerve activation practices, somatic practices, practices that, yoga gives us so many incredible breath tools to help us be able to calm the nervous system and release those tension patterns from the whole body, but of course, particularly around the pelvic area. And then on from that is rebuilding good posture, good breath patterns, being able to diaphragmatically breathe, being able to connect your diaphragm to your pelvic diaphragm, being able to mitigate a sneeze or a laugh, knowing how to activate those pelvic floor muscles properly and then also release them. And I'm very, very passionate about getting women to have trust in their bodies so that then they can go on and do that future proofing, the muscle and bone strengthening, the cross patterning for the brain, all the stuff that we need to be doing to keep us, out of nursing homes with incontinence. But if you're stuck in their fight and flight kind of rolled shoulders, neck, head thrust forward, pelvis tucked under, not breathing well, very tense, then the last thing you want to be doing is going into a gym session, doing a whole lot of weight training, etc. If you're not breathing properly, you will end up creating problems for yourself, pelvic floor problems, which could play out later on in life. So I'm like, we are unique, incredible hormonal beings. We're not little men. And if we learn about how we operate and actually look after ourselves in a way that helps us to live our best lives, it helps us to stay in the game, then a really, really fantastic consequence of that is that if we have children, they see what we're doing. They can mirror us, by osmosis. They will learn what looking after self-respect, self-esteem, self-belief, looking after yourself, what that actually is. And hopefully that'll help our daughters in particular and our sons, but have a different life experience than many of us had. So in a
The
nutshell,
question I asked,
since you asked.
I did. I asked why this, and wow, what an answer. I get it, because your lived experience is phenomenal in terms of the lessons, in terms of what it has led you to achieve. Those red rags to a bull early, you can't do this, you can't, and they continued throughout this your story and your life, these sort of red flags, you can't do this, and then you exploring, hold on, what is it about that I can't do? What is it that I am able to do? And why is it that they're saying I can't? It's not just a case of wanting to prove someone wrong. It's more a case of understanding, how will this benefit all the parties involved for me to take a different course of action? And that understanding and that deep diving is so obvious for me as a listener to hear, that you don't just take the immediate or the proposed solution. It's just a case of, let me see what other options are available. And this physiology that you're focusing on has unlocked so much in terms of what can be attributed to our physiology. What I'm hearing here is we don't understand how we are built, how we are formed. And so how is it possible for us to then resolve issues because we don't actually really understand? I mean, I don't understand my biology, my physiology, my biomechanics at the level that you do. And it seems crazy that we don't understand that. We're happy to get into a car and drive it because we know that that car has been built and it serves a purpose. But our body does serve a purpose, but we also
Yeah.
don't really know
Yeah.
how.
And our body's constantly giving us signals. So honestly, when I'm teaching, I'm a bit annoying to my students because I'm saying, okay, so somebody's saying, oh, I've got lower back pain, and I'm asking exactly where. So I'm like, hey, right, well, it sounds like it's the psoas, and I'm looking at how they're standing. I'm like, okay. And the psoas holds so much of our deep emotional, the nose that we got early on in life, etc. So whilst I'm teaching and whilst we're doing release work, etc., I'll be explaining, okay, so the why I'm getting you to release your jaw and relax the facial muscles at the same time is because this area is fascially connected into our pelvic area and into the psoas, which all connects into our spine. So when we consciously lengthen our exhalation, for example, activate the vagus nerve, go into that parasympathetic state, we are consciously also allowing our body to know it's safe and can start to let go of these tension patterns, which are causing us pain. So we're basically saying, thank you, body, for that message. You're in pain, you're not happy. And I'm going to what I can do to start listening in. And I'm always like, and getting into that state of reverence. So we're saying, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you for this, um, and thank you for the messages. And and I do put it on my students to learn about their own bodies so they understand, the difference it makes to actually breathe properly, open up a diaphragm that's stuck, maybe from pregnancy. Often women, birth, and their diaphragm never ever goes back into its fully extended state. So learning how to go into proper breath patterns that'll allow your pelvic floor to operate properly, will be able to lengthen properly, which will allow your digestion to work properly, will allow you to calm so you don't get constant IBS, for example. So if we are learning about how everything is connected, and especially about the bits that are unique to us as women, and especially how our hormones affect everything and how we can affect our hormones. This is the coolest thing. I love that we as human beings can actually have we can have mastery over our automatic responses. So we can actually control the way we breathe, change the way we move, put ourselves into physical positions that will help change the hormones that our pituitary gland produces, tells our body to produce. Now, that's so cool. And I'm like, that's wow, so incredibly cool. So why would you not want to know how to do that stuff and do it on a regular basis and teach your kids how to do it? Like when they're, if they're autistic and they're having a meltdown, and how to help them regulate their nervous system, and you can give them those tools from an early age, and we can do this. It's really, it's not hard. It's not hard. It's just having the curiosity to learn and then doing it. That's the big thing. So I'm very much, my whole mantra is little and often, because I understand most of us are super busy. We don't have time to, you know, get changed, drive somewhere, do an hour and a half workout or whatever, drive back and, take 3 hours out of our days. But to tack on incremental little power pauses or exercises throughout the day can be really, really powerful, more powerful. I always say to my students, way more powerful to do, roll out your mat and do 5 or 10 minutes a morning, or get outside into your garden if you've got a garden and do 10 minutes of really constructive movement and strengthening than to do 1 hour a week of running or of a Pilates class, for example. So I have things like, I've got the bathroom boot camp, which is like a freebie, and people can just tack on these posture and pelvic floor, just simple exercises onto a bathroom break, for example. So I try to encourage people to do little, whilst you're putting the kettle on, 2 minutes. Most women have really tight pelvises, yeah, and that you need that vascular flow around your pelvic organs for things to be healthy. So doing hula hooping of your pelvis, or I call it the Elvis twist. So you just, you know how Elvis does the twist. So mobilizing your hip joints to get, the rotator muscles around your hip joints, mobilizing to keep your hips nice and healthy. Just, you can do this stuff. It doesn't take any time. You just need to know what to do, and have a reminder to do it, kind of thing.
I hear you. And it's so, so needed, this message. It really is, Linda. I want to take you back to the story you were sharing earlier of your life, in terms of, you said it was a really tough beginning, that you were in a really black hole. And as you were sharing more and more of the unfolding of subsequent births, it became very clear that there was this death of the ego that was occurring alongside the births of each of your 3 children. And then it wasn't a metaphor, it was an actual water slide, this other black hole that you went down, the sort of the reality of it. But the resistance early on, and why it was such a tough beginning, because you were resisting the letting go of, the surrendering of the ego, and because it was so much around your identity. Share with us now what you believe in terms of the role of your identity is now.
The role of my identity now. So now I try and get out of my own way. And especially when I'm teaching, I try just to be a conduit of source to help the people who are directly in front of me. And I do find now that when I'm teaching, it's not me. I do feel like I'm a conduit, and often the words that are coming out are just what that person needs to hear. And I find that quite often that happens. I'll meet people and I'll know that the reason that I've met that person in that particular place is because there's a message that they need to hear. And something will come to me, well, I don't know where that came from, and I'll say, I feel like you need to hear this, and I'll just say it. Before, when I was working in television, I was so out of balance. I was so out of balance with who I truly am. And I was really quite numb emotionally. And everybody I worked with in television everybody was going out with everybody else. I was the only person who was going out with somebody who wasn't in TV. And you guys remember the 90s and the early 2000s. It was such a materialistic time. And I was like, you almost say what you do as you introduce yourself, and very much what you do for a job was your kind of status, if you like. And I think anyone who's had children, probably dads as well, my goodness me, that is the biggest crushing of ego, isn't it? Because no matter what control you had in life before you have children, suddenly this little scrap of flesh and bone completely derails you, and you realize you have literally no control. And I was very, very lucky in some ways to have yoga philosophy, to have those tools beside me at that time when I was really spiraling downwards, when my ego was literally being battered and bruised, like, constantly, because we have the yamas and the niyamas, which are sort of like the Ten Commandments, sort of guidance for life. And Santosha, which is acceptance, that was a huge thing to me. Santosha means you sit with what is, like, you literally sit with what is. And I always say this to my students when they're coming with various pain and all the rest of it, or often there's stories of trauma, and rather than pushing against reality, what you have experienced, pushing it away and therefore it actually never going away, sitting with what is, that total surrender and acceptance is the key ingredient to change. And that was a big one for me, like sitting with what Santosha. Swadhyaya is not just self-observation, almost like you're standing outside of yourself with a clipboard and you're just observing, no story attached, but you're just observing what is. And then also reading scripture, spiritual texts, things that you, when you're in a state of surrender, can identify with often, and helps you open up a sense that you're not in this world all on your own. You're not having to push forward by yourself. You are actually able to step into what I call like the river of life. And then ultimately, Ishvara Pranadhara, which means, you take responsibility for the actions. In yoga, this is called the tapas, the actions, the building of the fire. You decide the direction you want to go in life, roughly, without attachment to a certain outcome. And you take the actions, and it might be a very zigzagged road, but you take the actions that are going to take you in that direction that you desire. But ultimately, Ishvara Pranadhara is you have the grace to do so where you're handing over to something that's bigger than yourself. So it is, again, that lack, that non-attachment to a certain outcome, that belief that with action of you are in action, but that things are going to work out the way that for the highest good. And since having to make the choice it was really around 2006, 2007, to make the choice to be in victim as the mother who felt that she had caused her son's problems, to be in that choice to take a different path. Yeah. And to live that every day. Sorry, I'm getting emotional.
Yeah, explain the emotion behind what's going on, because you say it's a choice, but it's still so emotional for you.
Yeah. Like I said, it is a choice every day to not get swamped by what could be. Yeah. So, I have people saying to me often, in reference to my son in particular, "Oh, aren't you worried that," because he has tonic-clonic seizures as well. "Aren't you worried if, aren't you worried something will happen to him?" And, constantly, constantly. When he was little, when I would let him go on the playground and stuff, and people would say, "Oh, aren't you worried he'll fall?" And yes, and he did, and he broke his arm, and he ended up in hospital, and yes, things have gone wrong often, but more often they go right, and more often, and you have to believe that more often things will go right. And like I said to you, I made this conscious choice with the philosophy of yoga, Ishvara Pranadhara in particular, that I would never stop him doing the things that he was meant to do. That I would be, I would be there to support him and to love him and to advocate for him, but I wouldn't stop him because of my fear. And but it doesn't make it easy, It's hard. But life can be hard, and that's the other thing. You can't experience true joy if you haven't experienced stuff that's hard as well. And yoga allows you, I have found, to have the emotions, but they don't derail you. You can come back into your center because you have the tools to come back and be grounded in your truth, your center. So I guess, Amy, coming back to my why actually stems from, I guess, that realization, because I do believe it's the mums, it's the women who are in their wisdom years who have the real experiential knowledge. It's in ourselves. If you have birthed a child, you know that opening where you are connected to something that is way bigger than you could have ever imagined before, and the love that you feel is a pure love. I think later on it can get tangled, and often does, and so I encourage women to do what they can to help their vessel to be strong, so they can trust their vessel, so they can actually tap into that very unique strength and wisdom, which I feel is what is really needed in this world that feels scarily out of balance.
You used a word earlier, or a phrase of being in a state of reverence, and what that is in terms of what that means. The etymology of reverence is to stand in awe, fear, or respect. And just now you said you never wanted to stop Patrick because of your fear. And that state of reverence has allowed you to stand in awe and respect and with the fear at the same time, but not to sort of transfer that onto him. And this love, this pure love for your children, for the women, for life itself, this wisdom that is coming through you as a vessel, and that you are this incredible conduit that has allowed time to collapse in many ways, that it's just where you are right now, helping those who need you. And thank you to that hairdresser for that slow-mo epiphany, that divine intervention. Whatever happened there was a connection that formed that has led you on this incredible, purposeful, meaningful path with a very deep-rooted why. So Linda, thank you. And thank you for sharing, but thank you for everything you're doing to enable, empower, to lift women into a space where they are not little, as you said right at the beginning, where they're not having their relationships break down, where they're not keeping themselves small, where they're not having to leave roles which are stopping them from being the most incredible versions that they are. Everything that you're doing. Thank you.
Oh, and thank you so much for seeing me, and hearing me, Amy, on such a deep level, which I can see that you have. And yeah, thank you very much for your platform and everything you are doing in the world. I really, really appreciate it. It's been such an honor to be here with you today. So thank you.
Linda, how could people reach out?
So my website, lindastevenswellbeing.com. if you want to have a chat, I've got a free wellbeing clarity calls there. All of my different offerings are on my website. I run womenswellbeing.me, which is the platform that I do all my teaching on. So if you want to, join some classes, I teach live, and all the recordings are there. All my quick fix sequences, all my tips, etc., are there. So that's a great place to find me as well. And I'm on all the social media platforms as Linda Stevens Wellbeing.
Well, all of those links are in the show notes. So don't panic if you're out and about right now. Just head over to the show notes later and connect with Linda. Linda, thank you so much. It really has been a joy to bring your story onto the platform, to share your focus on why. Do you have some final words, please, for the listener?
Do the bathroombootcamp.com. Start little and often. Do the bathroom boot camp. If nothing else, just get yourself moving, get yourself improving your pelvic floor. It is the beginning of your core, and it is just the beginning of the core of who you truly are as a woman as well. It'll help your whole core being to shine when your pelvic floor is working well. So that's my last little bit of wisdom.
This episode's over, but let's keep the conversation going. How has this episode impacted you? Share your insights, takeaways, and reflections with actions on social media, or leave a review on Apple Podcasts. Your feedback creates powerful ripple effects, helping others to discover its value. Want to dive deeper into purpose? Check the show notes for links on how to work with me, where to buy my new book, Focus on Why, Create a Purposeful Way of Life, available in paperback, ebook, and audiobook, and where to sign up for Friday Focus, my weekly newsletter. Have a purpose, have a plan, focus on why.